How many of you enjoy the taste of fresh vegetables in the summer? How many of you would love to garden but don't seem to have the time? Do you want to garden but you do not have the space? Today we're going to discuss the concept of square foot gardening. Square foot gardening is a concept of gardening that was started by Mel Bartholomew. That is who is in this picture on the slide. The concept of square foot gardening is a way of utilizing raised gardening beds. Mel Bartholomew has a perfect blend of Mel's mix that he uses as a potting soil. His form of gardening is in a square foot area instead of the traditional rows that gardeners have used for many years. There are a number of advantages to square foot gardening. First is the Mel's mix that is weed free. The mixture contains no soil or dirt, so there are no weeds in the mixture to start with. If a weed does appear from blowing in the wind to settle in your square foot garden, it will be easy to spot and dispose of immediately. Other advantages include a high yield of vegetables or flowers in a completely organic environment with no chemicals. Watering is always an issue with gardens. Because of the new layout, watering only needs to be done to the plants and not the walkways. Because you only plant the number of seeds you want to grow, the tasks of thinning is eliminated. And the last advantage is that square foot gardening is easy for beginners to have a garden that produces and gives the sense of accomplishment that gardeners strive towards. As with all endeavors, there are some disadvantages to square foot gardening. The major disadvantage is the cost involved in setting up the garden itself. The cost includes enclosures and the Mel's mix. A second disadvantage is targeted toward deep root vegetables and crawlers like melons. Because the enclosures are not very deep, the vegetables have a hard time sending their roots down far enough. And lastly, the square foot garden does require more watering because the plants do not have deep roots to reach water sources in the ground. Enclosures are very important to keep the weeds out and the Mel's mix in so that weeds are kept at bay. People are very inventive and have found many ways to enclose their square foot gardens. The traditional cedar landscape timbers can be used, or a person can use untreated lumber. Remember that this is an organic garden and minimizing or eliminating any and all chemicals is the key. Other enclosures could include concrete blocks, metal, or Rubbermaid tubs. So what makes this Mel's mix so special? Mel's mix contains 3 components. Equal parts of each are used. The 3 parts include peat moss to keep the mixture airy, compost for the nutrients, and vermiculite to retain water in the mixture. This mixture is wonderful in minimizing weeds and allowing optimal growth of the plants. To set up a square foot garden, there are a few steps. First, you need to determine where you want the garden. Then a weed barrier is placed on the ground where the enclosure is going to go. The enclosure is then placed or built on top of the weed barrier. You mix your Mel's mix up according to the formula and place it into the enclosure. And lastly, grids are put onto the enclosure. These grids can be made of wood, string, or any other item that will not disappear when the elements of Mother Nature appear. Now that the garden is all set up, the fun part is to plan what you will be planting in it. Step 1, you will need to decide what to grow. I usually start with my favorites. Step 2, you will need to get the seeds or plants that you will want to grow. To determine the number that is needed, you will need to consult a guide that is specifically for square foot gardening. These guides can be found in books or online. Here are a couple of guides that I found online. This is a partial listing that I found in the Square Foot Gardening book written by Mel Bartholomew. Once we have determined what and how many to plant and we have purchased the seeds or plants, step 3 is that we need to plant the correct number in each 1 foot square. And step 4 is simply to water the plants. Let's make one together. I chose to make a salad garden. I determined what I wanted to grow, being the lettuce, spinach, radishes, tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, cucumbers, and peppers. I then determined the number of seeds or plants that were needed per square, which is the numbers that are shown here. Now we place the seeds or plants in the square with the correct number per the guide. Here I have chosen to put lettuce in the square and place the 4 plants equally throughout the square. Next, I have put in the spinach with its 9 plants per square. Here we added the radishes. There are 16 seeds per square. You can see these are placed in a 4x4 square, so they are evenly spaced. I have now filled 1 square of each of the vegetables that I have for my salad garden. As you can see, there is still a number of spots left to fill. I have now filled in all the squares with more tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, and peppers. This would complete this garden plot. I would then just need to sit back, water, and watch it grow. A few things to keep in mind while planting your own garden is how big or tall the plants will grow and how long until they harvest. I chose to put the tomatoes on one side because they are tall and I did not want them to shade some of the smaller plants. I also made sure that the radishes were on an outside square because they are one of the first crops to be harvested in my garden. Now it is your turn to design your own garden. Students will be in groups of 2. We will count off to determine your group. Each group has the remainder of class to complete this assignment, and each group will get a planting sheet to draw their garden on. The groups will also get a seed guide sheet to determine how many seeds or plants they need to be placed in each square. In your group, you will need to determine what to grow in your garden by making a list of all the squares that will be filled. You will use the seed guide sheet to place the correct number of seeds or plants in each square. Each square will be labeled with the vegetable you chose, and each group will determine a name for their garden and put it on the top line. And lastly, the names of all group members will be put on the back of their planting sheets. Have fun making your garden.